Hello, everyone. Yeah, I know we're getting toward the time where, at least up here in the Northeast, hopefully soon, we'll be able to get out and do some outdoor photography and indoor photography and not be outside and freezing. And so I wanted to talk about some basics before we get into planning for the year. So we'll talk about basics today. Now, if you don't use your camera to just do all your settings for you, which I do not recommend, and we'll explain why in a minute. Cold weather can make it difficult. Cameras are not made for use with gloves on, and so that can make things a bit tricky when you try to do this in the winter. And of course, what I'm talking about is aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Now, the reason you don't want your camera to do this stuff for you is multiple. So let's go into each one and we'll talk about why you don't want your camera doing that. Aperture. Aperture is going to give you that beautiful bokeh, right? If you're doing an event or a portrait and you want to highlight one thing of it, be it an object on a table, be it a person, whatever it is that you want to highlight, being able to take that F number and drop it down as low as it can go. I've got one that goes down to 2.8. I wish I had one that was a little lower, but 2.8 is good. Allows you to focus in with a short depth of field, which means that certain things are going to be in focus and everything else is going to blur off. That allows your subject to pop, right? They appear in front of you and everything else fades off into a blur. You can still see what's going on, but the focus is on that person or on that object. But the problem is if you go into a low light situation and you're using aperture, you're going to, as those numbers go down, it lets in more and more and more light, which is great, right? You got a low light situation. I can put it down to 2.8. I'm going to get the most light in I can get because this is as low as my lens can go. However, if you don't want the bokeh, if you don't want things falling off, if you've got a diorama type scene in front of you and you need that greater depth, you have to dial that down. As you dial that down, meaning higher numbers, because remember this is 1 over, so because it's 1 over 2.8 is much more than 1 over 5.8 or 1 over 7. So as you bring that up so that you get a greater depth of field, and if you're not familiar with depth of field, there's calculators online and you can get for your phone. Go play with them, check your distances and what the apertures get for you, and see what you can get an idea of what depth of field you're looking at. But having that depth of field, you're going to want more of it, and the bigger the depth of field, the less light that's coming into your camera, which isn't as good in low light situations. So now we walk to ISO. I'm going to skip shutter speed for a moment here and go to ISO. A lot of people just say, well, we'll dial the ISO up. High ISO gives you grain. All right. So your camera may say, oh, well, I'm in a low light situation here. I am just going to crank that ISO up because I'm going to fix certain things. And it could do any of these three things to try to manipulate it to get the light that it needs. And just doing these kind of off of a mathematical calculation is not what the eye is going to see. So as you dial the ISO up, the pictures get more and more grainy. Now, there are applications out there that can fix these, but you don't want to do that if you can avoid it. Why do you want something else messing with a photograph that you took, that's your work? And so you want to keep the ISO low. Now, when you're outside, it's usually around ISO 400, right? When you go inside, the new digital cameras can go to insane levels of ISO. So you can see things that you wouldn't normally see. But when you really look at the picture is very grainy. It's like an old film photograph. Which, if that's what you're going for, have at it. But if you're looking for a clean image, there's only one other thing that you can do. Now, your depth of field is going to fix your aperture, and then you're going to have to work around that. These are all going to be trade-offs. Your ISO is going to give you grain if you go up too high. That's not going to work. So the only thing left is shutter speed. The slower the shutter speed, meaning the longer the time that the shutter is open. All right, the faster the speed, the faster that thing clicks, the less light it lets in. But if you're lowering the shutter speed, now you're starting to get into motion blur. If you have a scene where people are sitting, for example, I'll give you a real world example here. When I go to the fort and I'm walking around from place to place, the tailors usually have a room which has some of the most light that these rooms at the fort have, which is kind of sad. They leave the door open, so they got light coming in from the door. Just down from that on the same side, so we're gonna set the scene for you. There's a fireplace to my back. The entry door is to the left, and it's open. About 8-10 feet down from that is a window. The wall that I'm facing is a solid wall. Over on the right, and the wall behind me with the fireplace is a solid wall. Over to the right is another window, about in the middle of the wall, which puts it between where the door and the window is on the other side. That's the only light coming in. But I'm working with tailors. Tailors don't move quickly while they're sewing things. So if I'm trying to get a picture of them all working and sewing, and maybe I want to get a picture of the crowd as well to show that people are paying attention to it and what the mood of the day is, I can go pretty low on shutter speed, right? I can go down to an 80th of a second, or I'd usually be in the 200s for a minimum. So I can go down to an 80th maybe in there. Now, because of the lighting situation here, and because I want a good depth of field, because I've got a crowd in front of me that I want to get, or I've got the collection of tailors working. Now, if I wanted to get a really good picture of them working on it, then I would probably go to the 2.8. I want that bokeh. I want just their hands and the needle and let everything else fall away. But I'm not doing that here. I need a larger depth of field. In order to get that larger depth of field and keep the ISO low, because again, I'm trying to get pictures of people here. I don't want it to be grainy. So the trade-off is I can drop down to an 80th of a second. Okay. I can, at the same time, now raise my aperture to 5.6. So it's 1 over 5.6. And now it's got half the opening that it did at 2.8. Because remember, this is aperture. This is the opening in your camera. 1 over 2.8 is the amount of area that it's going to be open. 1 over 5/6 is half that area is now going to be opened. And now I can dial my ISO down. My ISO is still pretty high. I think it's between 1200 and 1600 that I have to shoot to get a bright image in here. Because remember, if you can't get if you shoot it too dark, it can't pull the detail back out of nothing that it could see. And if it goes too light, you can't bring the detail back over things that got washed out. So you've got to find that sweet spot. There are some things you can adjust a little bit, right? You can bring the brightness up a little bit, you can up the exposure a little bit, but again, if you really want the detail, you got to nail this straight on. If you let your camera do it, you don't know what you're going to get, right? If your camera setting is on portrait and it says it's going to do everything for you, or you're using your cell phone and it's going to do everything for you, you're going to get whatever some mathematical calculation figures is going to be the best shot. The only way you're going to know how to do the best shot is to practice, is to get used to taking shots and looking at them, right? You got a digital camera, you've got a screen on like 98% of them. Look at the screen when you get done. What do you think of the picture that you just took? Do you need to tweak your settings? A lot of it becomes practice, and then once you've had the practice, it becomes second nature to do this stuff. With the spring coming up and being able to shoot inside and outside, you're going to be shifting between one thing and another. So keep that in mind when you do it. If your camera, regardless of whether it's a phone or a physical camera, I prefer regular cameras myself, has the ability to allow you to set some presets, you might want to consider that, not as the be all and end all, but as a starting point. So as I said, if I go into the situation and I think I'm going to need 1600 ISO, I'm going to shoot at 5.6, f of 5.6, and I'm going to shoot it an 80th of a second. And the camera allows me to do that. I can put that in as a preset. And then when I get into the environment, most of my stuff is there. I just need to dial it in a little bit more. Maybe I can bring it in a little bit more on the speed, make it a little faster. Maybe I can dial that ISO down because there's more light coming in right now than was at the time that I came up with the formula that I needed. And that gives you that ability to dial it in. Failing that, if you really need to and you're having trouble remembering it, you got your phone, right? Open up a notepad on your phone. Put down the different conditions. And how you get those conditions, we'll talk about next week. But make notes to yourself. Make it something simple so that you can just look at it quickly and dial those settings right in so you can get into taking your shots, because you don't want to lose the time if you can avoid it. So that's what I got for you guys this week. I will talk to you all next week.